Good morning, world. Welcome to this week's edition of ReImagine Liberty, presented by Blvck Womxn Worldwide. I will be your host today, Kyra Lee, CEO and founder of the ReImagine Liberty podcast. I am so excited because we have an amazing show scheduled today. On the call with us this morning is Toni Bryce, actress and activist from Atlanta, Georgia. Good morning, Toni. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. How are you?
Doing amazing, doing phenomenal. So what's been new, girl, since the last time we chatted?
Well, just trying to book auditions. Doing my daily activism per usual, trying to educate the people on how to treat the people. Yeah. I recently booked an untitled Marvel project, which I have already filmed for. So that was pretty cool to continue to work and do what I'm doing. When it's just me, myself, and I in the community.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Are things relaxing at all in Atlanta when it comes to COVID?
Absolutely. Well, we have a governor that never really shut Atlanta down, with the exception of maybe like March, April. But even coming into May of 2020, it was already reopening. It was like already back in phase 1 or phase 2. And honestly, here in that, it always has felt like it was open. It was just the different experiences were the masks.
Yes.
So that was pretty much it.
I love it. I love it. So let's circle back, since Toni Bryce has a few phases I want to touch on as a Black woman, all phenomenal. But let's start with you, the actress, Toni Bryce, the actress. So you were featured recently in an extremely popular show called P-Valley, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your character?
So I played the character of Nineveh. I was in season 1, episode 5, and I played the character of Nineveh. She was a character that was in the jail cell scene with the mother, Patrice Woodbine, and the star of the show, Mercedes. And she was in when it comes into the scene, Mercedes is getting booked and put into the cell, and you first hear Nineveh's voice, which is her pleading with the guard to come out of the cell. And so, as a Black woman of trans experience, they put her in the men's holding cell. And so eventually she comes out and she's over with the ladies. And yeah, that was pretty much, it wasn't a huge moment, but I think it was an impactful moment if people really paid attention, if they looked beyond just it being about comedy, and they looked at the realization of it all and how we do experience that today, even with the jail system. So
I absolutely love that. When we talk about being authentic, allowing folks from the role to play the role, how important is it when we're looking to have a character as a woman of trans experience to have a woman of trans experience play that character?
It's very, very, very important. And it's crazy that you even mentioned that, because on my show Trans Table Talk, I did a episode where I reviewed a movie. I don't know if you heard about it, called Secret Society. And the story was about two Black women of trans experience, but the creator decided to use two Black women who are cis. And her reason for doing that was she felt like nobody would support the project. And I'm just like, and because of that, I feel like she went above and beyond to make sure people that were watching knew that these people were women of trans experience. So she used very toxic and problematic language. And I feel like when you have people who are authentically identifying with the role, because I can play woman, period, doesn't even have to be specified. But then I also feel like when it comes to those like small nuances, it's like you just need people that walk in those shoes, because that was not okay. It was not
Absolutely.
okay. Yeah.
I totally agree. And on today's show here at ReImagine Liberty, we're going to be getting into what actual activism for the LGBTQIA community looks like, what activism for our sisters of trans experience looks like when we are trying to be an ally and when we are trying to be a friend. I am so excited to welcome from London, England, the UK, our other sister, Kayza Rose. Welcome, Kayza. How are you? And I love this head wrap, girl. This is giving me so much life right now. Super appreciate. For you that are just turning in, Reimagine Liberty is an international podcast at this moment, definitely trying to connect women of all experience within the Black community, making sure that we are here for you all one step at a time. But while Kayza is logging on with audio, Toni, I want to get back to when it comes to your work in trans activism in Atlanta. Tell me a bit about some of your recent projects.
Well, for me, Trans Table Talk is one of the biggest things because it started during COVID and it was a way to still be seen and heard in the community, but doing it virtual. So I feel like doing that show has been super, super dope because people have gotten the opportunity to still be educated. And it's a platform specifically for people of trans experience, so people can come to that platform to learn and get information and education about who we are and some of our experiences because they're not all the same. So I think that's one that has been dope. And then I think two as well, being a part of different marches. Recently we had the Unity March here in Atlanta. And so they had people of all genders, race, they came up and spoke about their experiences. And so I was one of those people that spoke on behalf of the trans community specifically. And doing things like that is super dope because you always want to make sure, especially when you do a unity situation, that it is unity. And I told them that unity allyship is unity. Like that's what it is because we are unified, we are one. So doing things like that, Trans Table Talk. I'm also a community health outreach worker. So I work really specific with like grants that target population is Black MSM, but also Black young trans folk. So that's also one thing and connecting with them. And that way, when it comes to ballroom, teaching these people how to be respectful, teaching us how to be respectful to us, because even that becomes a problem. It's just a daily thing. Like I don't think a lot of times for me, I need to be because we all have our lanes, but I don't feel like every day is I have to go out and march with the people, which is needed. And we all have our place. But I feel like with us, it's the everyday thing because a lot of times in those marches, they're not thinking about us anyway. So it's kind of a different on Black. It's the Black focus, but it's a specific Black focus. So for me, it's just the everyday thing. For me, it's really educating. And in my community in ballroom, I'm a mother. I'm also a chosen mother, and so I feel like that's just part of my responsibility and being a person that has influence and mentorship and giving guidance to a whole generation of people. You have to be able to teach them what that looks like and lead by example as well. So I always got to be on my P's and Q's. So I think that's what it looks like for me.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I want to make sure that our listeners here at Reimagine Liberty keep up with all the verbiage because for you all that are tuning in, I want to make sure that if we're not from this community, we're making sure we're bringing you along on this journey. So what does it mean to be a mother? What does it mean to be a chosen mother in this community?
So a mother, someone in general that is nurturing to the scene, somebody that is welcoming the new generation, that's teaching the new generation, somebody that is giving them guidance. And to be a chosen mother for me means somebody that has a more personal and intimate connection with me. You have your birth parents and then you have your chosen parents. And like on Mother's Day, I had made a comment, not a comment, a status about, happy Mother's Day to my sisters of trans experience, because a lot of times what the world doesn't realize is when those parents who choose to, kick their kids out mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we pick up those pieces. When they're out in the street, we pick up those pieces. We have to continue to shelter and feed them and love them and guide and mentor. And that part of Pose specifically is so real in real life. Like that's real life. We can talk about the ballroom aspect because it's a different time frame versus what it is now, but that mothering is very, very real. So you have mother who's mother to all, a nurturer to all, but then you have chosen where you are my child. I may not have birthed you into this world, but you are my child. I'm responsible for you.
Absolutely. I want to get into some of the intersections with this work. And Kayza, thank you so much for joining us again. This is our episode of Reimagine Liberty this week. And if you could unmute your mic, I want to get a bit of dialogue going with the both of you all in this work. So first and foremost, without further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Kayza Rose to the conversation. How are you this morning, Kayza?
I am good. So over here in London, it is now 3:10 p.m. So not morning for me, but good morning to you all. And I hope that you are, if you're not feeling wonderful, I hope that you can feel good by the end of this conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things I would like to ask is, Kayza, you have gotten absolutely elbow deep in the trenches doing this work from London in terms of being an ally to the trans community. How did you get started in that work?
I have to start by being honest. We are conditioned to be transphobic. We are conditioned to feel inferior as Black people. It's a social conditioning. And so the first time I was like kind of made abundantly aware that I had misgendered somebody, they told me, I made assumptions about that person's gender and it was incorrect. And the person, although it's not their responsibility to take on board any of the heavy lifting in terms of educating people, they chose to do that. They educated me in that moment. And from that moment, I realized how much I don't know and how much work is my responsibility, because that is the right thing to do. It's not about actually being called an ally. It's about doing the work. And if people from the trans experience say that I'm an ally, then that's what I am to them. But generally, I don't like go around saying I'm an ally to trans people. That's not my place. If trans people feel like I am, then that's the work that I've done. But it is a lifetime commitment to doing that work and unlearning and learning other things. So. Yeah, it was a few years back, and the person that I'm speaking about is Campbell X, who has then become like a really great friend, and we do a lot of work together. But he was really gracious, and he didn't have to be, and it was not his responsibility, but he did anyway. And that was my kind of segue into, oh my gosh, there's so much I don't know, and so much I've been conditioned to believe and assume, and so much privilege that I have. So yeah, that was kind of like my first experience in experiencing that I got so much work to do.
I love that. Thank you for that. So Toni, you were just speaking to the aspects of entertainment, media, film that try to capture some of the pain, some of the real textures for women and men of trans experience in short snapshots. Short, small snapshots. We get a peek into the life of those within the Black community, within this entire Black Lives Matter era, that still do not have our full support. A section of our family that still do not have full visibility, that still do not have full love, full acceptance, forget tolerance, full acceptance into the protections that we're talking about when we talk about Black Lives Mattering. And I can think back to our last interview with you, Toni, where you gave me a statistic that just knocked me to the floor. I haven't got over it. You educated me from the perspective of average life expectancy for a Black woman of trans experience. Can you get into that a bit for me?
So and I don't know that this has been updated since it was first put out there, but the average life expectancy for a Black woman of trans experience is the age of 35.
And for our listeners, I want you to sit with that for a second. 35 years old. Average life expectancy for a Black woman of trans experience is 35 years old. So when we're talking about Black Lives Mattering, we're talking about this reimagining liberty concept and what it truly means to be there for all people inside of this fight. There is a group within our family where the average life expectancy, whether to Toni's point, that is old information or still current, that's staggering. That's absolutely staggering, disproportionately unacceptable. Okay. And Toni, I'm sorry, I did cut you off to make that point. Where were you going?
No, I was just going to speak to, am I saying correct, Kayza?
Kayza.
Kayza, I'm sorry. Nice to meet you, Kayza. I love the fact that you talk about it's not only about being an ally, but it's about doing the work. Because a lot of times I feel like people ask, how can I be a better ally, right? And I think people feel like just because I'm not in disagreement with, I'm an ally. No, you're not. So don't ask me how to become a better ally if you're not doing any work. You have to do the work. And to all my activists out there that are Black, specifically activists, be activists for Black people, period. Because that includes all Black people and not just a specific group of Black people, which is why that statistic is very real for a lot of us. And as a person creeping up to that age, it becomes a little more real.
Absolutely. I want to thank Shamari Simmons for tuning in on Facebook Live and YouTube Live with your comment. Shamari states, we have to do better to protect our sisters. And that is absolutely true. Thank you so much, Shamari, for listening today.
And
when it comes to, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Really quick, and speaking to being a chosen mother, that is one of my godchildren right there, Shamari. So, hey, Shamari.
Thank you so much for listening, and we're so happy to have you today. I really want to get into this work of inclusion, because a lot of times when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're speaking from proximity to whiteness, and we're speaking from the white gaze being present. Mm-hmm. So I want to dismiss white gaze just for a moment. Love you guys, but I'm gonna table that just for a second. And I want to speak specifically to our Black family in this moment. We need to do a better job of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the Black family ourselves. And one of the things that I've been very proud to champion within Black women worldwide is us having discussions like the one today that give us the opportunity to acknowledge how diverse Blackness is, so we can really start being inclusive and creating equity. So, Kayza, I want to ask you this question. When it comes to producing these events, when it comes to being in this work as a commitment, what does it look like to truly be inclusive from your lens?
I guess we start by not making assumptions about what people's Black experience is. We all have individual Black experiences. So, for example, if I asked Toni about Toni's experience as a Black person, I cannot assume that everybody from a Black trans experience has the same experience as Toni. It's about not making those assumptions. To be truly inclusive when it comes to Blackness, we A, have to not make assumptions, and B, we cannot police the Black experience, which is what so many people have been doing. Now, I do understand that a lot of people are doing that because they don't feel safe. And when people don't feel safe, they start to police all different kinds of areas and who can come in, who can speak, who gets platformed, who does not. And in terms of our experience, we have to start to center the people within our experience that need protecting the most. And so when we start from that place, that is when we start to become truly inclusive. But we have to do that work. We have to be speaking to people who are usually not included in the conversations. These people are not hard to reach. We're just not trying. We're not speaking to people doing that work already. We're not bringing those people in because there are people doing the work. We can't do that colonial thing by saying, oh, well, we've done that work. And so everything that we do is perfect. We've done all of that work. And so we don't need to include any other groups. We have to break down that conditioning that we're doing things perfectly because we've done a lot of work. Like I said before, it's a lifetime commitment of looking outside of where we're comfortable, looking outside of the groups that we already know. There are people doing that work. It's just that you have not done that work to find those groups. We have to do better. We cannot be complacent in the work that we're doing. Otherwise, we've failed.
Absolutely, Kayza. Couldn't agree more. And thank you for that. When we talk about platform, I'd like to pivot for a moment and spend a little time with the concept of platform. For those listening in, platform from the seats of the three women in front of you is an extremely powerful tool. It is the decision to give a woman a voice, to tell her story, to embody the representation of those that have her labels, her presentation, and come from similar backgrounds as her. That is what platform is, okay? And speaking from a US perspective, I'm located out here in Long Beach, California, and we are interesting in this California state. We are very interesting as a Black experience and a Black family because there are a great deal of Black folks in California that come from mixed racial backgrounds. Okay. I'm a Detroit girl, born in California, and I'm back now, and I'm dealing with all of the Black families' views on platform. And I want to be clear that in California, where Hollywood is located, there is this very interesting habit of assigning stories to Black folks that don't come from that lens.
Mm-hmm.
And it's toxic. So I want to spend a little time with the work necessary to truly give platform to Black women. And I'll start with you, Toni. You are an actress that comes from a space of being so authentic, so real, so powerful. Okay. Is there a certain amount of responsibility in the roles you choose to accept as an actress?
Absolutely. There are some roles that I think back, especially when I first started, I cringe and I think, why did I do that? I should have never done that, because I was so in my early stages of, I want opportunities. I'm going to take the opportunity, but not every opportunity is the right opportunity. And years now, I wouldn't. I would. It's certain things I don't put on my resume, certain things I don't put on my reel, certain things that I wish would just be erased because they don't care. They're telling a story from their lens. They're telling a lot of times an incorrect story. And when you are that fresh and you're just like, I want to get the experience, I want to get out there, you take those opportunities, and they're not always the right opportunities. And it's sad because I always talk about as well, when people are out here creating, we need to be in those rooms creating with them. I feel like people seem to think they can create a story. In my experience, they feel like they can create a story and then include you later. No, include me from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Don't include me later. Don't write a script and say, hey, Toni, can you review this to make sure I did everything right? I'm not a teacher in that aspect to where I need to review your paper and grade you. No. Come to me at the beginning. Let's work on it together if you really care. So yeah, you definitely, I definitely there is responsibility in the opportunities that you take, because not every opportunity is the right opportunity, for sure.
And I do want to highlight something that you pointed out with Grace. I want us to think, when we're evaluating those of us that are going into performing arts, that are going into acting and theater and film, there's a growth curve to this. Mm-hmm. Largely, we are talking about young people growing up in front of the camera. And I do want us to give them some grace to allow for the fact that we develop. When we talk about those that are playing our highest level of mothers, our highest level of ancestry in these biopics, I do want you all to be a bit graceful with our sisters in terms of how harshly we deliver our messages. Mm-hmm. But there is some responsibility in selecting roles that are responsible based on who you actually are and what you've actually been through. And I want to pivot to you, Kayza. You are a producer in several domains. You have a fantastic series, Family Dinner, that speaks to some of these topics of inclusion and giving platform. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So Family Dinner was born out of some conversations that I'd either been having or had kind of borne witness to. And it was about, mental health. It was about self-care. It was about, people from the queer POC/Black experience kind of not having a space to gather in a way that we're not forced to spend money or drink alcohol. And so where are these spaces where we get to tell our stories? Where are these spaces that get to center us around food? Because within our cultures, if you're Black, we all know about, the Sunday dinners. We all knew that there's a particular relative or the particular person from our chosen family who could really cook. We like to share food. That's how we show love. And so I was like, where are these spaces that have those elements? And so that's kind of how Family Dinner was born. And that was in 2017. And then, of course, now COVID is preventing us from sharing spaces in a physical sense. But that doesn't mean that we don't need space to have these conversations. And it pivots from being food as the nourishment to us holding space is the nourishment. Us having these conversations, sharing these stories is the nourishment. And so, the next family dinner that we have Mel's. And Mel's is going to be talking about gender, spirituality, and love. And it centers transness, the trans Black experience specifically in that conversation. And so we have always had trans people in our communities. This is something that was conditioned out of us. This is not new. Like when we watch Pose or we watch certain things, people who have not done the work to go and look for these stories in our histories would think that this is new. Trans people are not new. Trans people are our family by default, And so that's why it's important to have people like Mel's who created, the free Black university where you can get resources, where you can, seek education from a decolonial lens. Having people like Mel's and other people of the trans experience is really important because you get to tell your story on your terms. We show up and we're guests in that space. It's really important to, to center certain experiences in this way. So, that's the first one that's coming up in digitally for this year. So sorry we were away for so long, but, it's about making sure also that when you're in control of a situation, when they are my brands and my productions, I center self-care really. So it's also about me making sure that I'm okay enough to deliver this for the community. Prior years, I burnt myself out. I got really unwell physically and mentally because I was like, oh my gosh, all this work needs to be done. I need to if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And that is how we are conditioned. That's kind of scarcity mindset, that idea, if we don't do it now, it'll never be done. I'll never get this opportunity to do it again. Well, history tells us a lot. We are always going to need spaces. We are always going to need these conversations. So I don't need to rush myself and I don't need to rush anybody else. And so when things are supposed to happen, they happen. So really looking forward to the next family dinner, which is on the 23rd, I believe.
And we will definitely be promoting and giving information to Kayza's event on our website, www.blvckwomxn.org. Feel free to tune in. And as we approach that date, it will be available on our Instagram and social media pages as well for those that would like to tune in. I do want to give a bit of time to the importance of becoming educated in general, having a student mentality in general. As we talk about this fight, as we talk about all of the different pivots necessary to create a real working liberty model for all, I think it's important that we start speaking to this topic of mindset. For our activists and woke folk, we have a way of saying doing the work, but I want to spend a little time breaking down what that looks like on a daily basis. Kayza, you started with stopping the assumptions that are ingrained through social conditioning, thinking that you know what's going on in a situation based on the way it appears. The next step that I want to spend some time with is, who are you inviting to the table? And so I'll pivot back to you, Toni. When we talk about the folks that we are allowing to speak, when we talk about producing art, producing platform, producing message, what are some of the things that you use to choose who sits at the table with you, who is in the streets doing your activism work with you? Who are the folks that you bring along for your journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I feel like the people that I guess that are doing what I'm trying to do, which is take whatever platform socially or, whether it's in person or social networks, and just educate. And I've for one, people with open minds, people that are not so rooted, I guess, in traditional thinking that you can't tell them anything else because they're not going to believe anything else. Because that mindset for me, I can't. I'm not fighting and debating with anybody about my identity. It's just not going to happen. But yeah, I want to say people that I guess we have that similarity of just the giving the education and information, doing these kinds of things because it's necessary. And a lot of people feel like, oh, I just want to, live my life. I don't owe anybody any response. But somebody has to be out there to do it. And I know, like you just said, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And I know but I feel comfort in knowing that I'm not the only one, even in my own community. So I would say people that has activism, I guess, that mirrors mine to a certain degree. I hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And the thing that I want to point out too is that there is a certain power in selection. Black women are in a position to select and choose tribe. We are in a position to select and give opportunity. And for everyone listening in, I want you to really sit with that. We are not in the same position as our grandmothers. We do have a certain amount of very visible agency, and I want you to own that always. So when we talk about selecting folks to speak, selecting people to give platform, you have to do a little bit of authentic thinking for yourself and look at your patterns. Are your panels all light-skinned Black women? Are they? Are they all women of cis experience? Are they? Are they women that truly have walked the walk? Or are they women that tend to possess a certain set of features that you think will be appealing to the audience physically? Do they have the license and the experience to speak on the topic? Or are they your homegirl that has rode with you along the way that just happens to be down for the cause? Who are you giving the microphone to? And I'll pivot for my next question to you, Kayza, because you're excellent at this. When you are selecting folks to include in the events that you produce, what criteria, what method do you use to decide who you're giving platform to?
It's a good question. It depends on the reason for the platform. So with Allies Corner, for instance, which is an event that connects potential allies to trans people, it depends on what the reason is for that particular space. And the host is always Miss Kimberly, who is a Black trans woman, because it has to be trans-led. So although it's my event, it's about making sure primarily that trans people are centered in that experience. And so I always speak to Kim first about the people that I want to invite into the space. I always speak to Campbell and I speak to other people of trans experience before I even consider what I'm going to do with that space. And then they get to say, okay, well, this person is doing some really great work in the trans community. Can you invite them? This person has done a lot of activism. This is a great trans activist that is perhaps being kind of drowned out by the noise of kind of like the celebrity type people who always get platformed. Who else is doing this work? Now, I might know a lot of things, but I don't know everything. And just because I navigate certain spaces, I do not occupy the trans experience. It's not for me to say who's doing work and who's not doing work. I have to actually ask people of that experience. And so that's where I always start when it comes specifically to Allies Corner and then build out from there. But it's always trans-led. And that was really important for that space to be trans-led. And then we say, okay, who do we invite into that space, whether they're cis or trans, and how do they relate to the discussion that we're trying to have today? So when we screen films, it's always films from trans directors. When we have DJs, it's always DJs of the trans experience. So we have to make sure that we are platforming the people that should be platformed in that kind of space. I wouldn't platform a cis person in that space. We take up so much of the spaces. So in Allies Corner, it's about connecting potential allies. And that's another thing. I always start off that space with the conversation that Campbell and I first had, which is me misgendering Campbell, letting people understand that I did not start off my journey in a perfect, kind of Hollywood story of I knew everything and I was just so educated in this subject and I showed up and I did all of this great work. No, I did something that potentially could have caused that person harm. That's how I started my journey. And so the allies in that space understand that you cannot be afraid to get things wrong and do nothing with your life in terms of saying, I just think that, this statistic about, the average life expectancy for a Black trans woman is 35. That's really bad. Oh, no, that's terrible. Let me just tell everybody this is terrible. That's not doing the work. That's relaying information that you received. You know, you have to do a lot more than that. And sometimes you will get things wrong. You have to then change your behavior after you got something wrong. You know, so it's about making sure that when we're creating these spaces, that the right people are centered within those spaces. Otherwise, what is the point of the space? You have to always go back to the anchor. You know, why am I creating this space? Who is it for? And what result do I plan to get from this space? So it depends on why I invite people to tables as to, you know, what the table is for.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most beautiful things that you said is starting with the purpose. And I will direct this toward all of our listeners of all experiences. I want us to get really honest with ourselves in this moment. When we talk about reimagining liberty, when we talk about Black Life Mattering, when we talk about allyship, what did you get out of bed this morning to do? And if you got out of bed this morning to help, to push us forward, then you're also agreeing in that moment to abandon some of your internal prejudices that none of us know about. Only you, and you do know. I want to spend a little bit of time on breaking down the relationship between queer and trans experience, because a lot of folks think that they are intertwined in a way that they're not. It is a separate conversation. And for those of you who are not aware of how separate it is, it almost pushes a level of phobia and a level of hate that makes you look extremely uneducated. It's a separate conversation. I want to unpack it a little bit. So Toni, I'll pivot to you. When we talk about women of trans experience, it is possible for you to be a woman of trans experience that is straight and a woman of trans experience that is queer. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And I'm glad that you get that, because I feel like I'm always having that conversation, even within our own community. People like to say, oh, the gay community, the gay community. And I'm just like, great, you know, but I'm not gay, you know? So, but people like to say the gays, and people like to say, when they say the straights is synonymous for them for cis hetero, but see, they don't have that language to say cis hetero, or they're too lazy tongued to say cis hetero. They just want to say the straights. Because when you say the straights, I feel like that includes me as well. Because and I'm very intentional about not calling myself a trans woman, but a woman of trans experience, because I feel like when you say, and just in my opinion, when you say like that's a woman, but that's a trans woman, that's like, it seems a little divisive for me. But when I say that's a woman, and if I volunteer of trans experience, then I volunteer that. But there's common ground in there. And so what people need to understand is, out of the LGBTQ, a lot of that is sexuality. And then you have the T, which is gender identity. And my identity is not synonymous with my sexual orientation. And so I can be a part of the community because I'm trans, and we are very much so, we have a lot of similar experiences when it comes to dealing with society. And so we find comfort in each other. So I get that part. But people need to understand that there's still a difference in what those letters mean. I'm not gay. However, there are trans people that might be gay, and that's fine. But my identity is not wrapped up in my sexual orientation, and people need to understand that. So yes, I am when we say cis hetero, I am a trans hetero. And I'm glad you understand that, because that is key.
It's very important. And I'm giving this language because we need it, y'all. If you're asking me, well, why is Kyra sitting over here stirring the pot? Because the food is good. Because this is what we're here for. You're not offended. And you have questions that you want answers to. So the reason that we're having this conversation is because all Black life matters to me. And I hope it matters to you. And let's get into how we are not loving each other correctly, and how we are not informed of the damage and the pain that we're causing, and how we have misstepped, misgendered, and miseducated one another on the way that we are performing in the world. I think it's necessary space, and I'm glad you guys are tuning in to listen here at ReImagine Liberty. So I'll pivot to you, Kayza. When we talk about jumping into representation, right, within the LGBTQIA plus alphabet mafia, I want to talk about the importance of allowing folks to tell you their story, because you're wonderful at that. When you're producing an event, when you're holding space, and you happen to be an activist within Black Lives Matter, correct?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Within these spaces, it's very important that we get to know our Black family, because we're complicated. We're complicated beings in this work. And the folks that are serving the Black family right now, because that's the thing to do. During our break here in COVID, all of you all who are working from home decided to join us in the streets, and we appreciate you. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much, right? But I really want to get into the complexity of this Black family that we talk about under LGBTQIA+. So when you are picking folks from the queer community and picking folks from the trans community, as a cisgendered woman, Kayza, what are some things that you are very conscious of when we're talking about relationship to our family members?
That's also a very good question. You don't have to invite everybody to the table at every table. It's looking at also kind of bringing people in that don't necessarily get a chance to speak very often, because you can find a lot of value there because their experience is unique to them. But also understanding that we're not always going to agree. That doesn't mean you don't deserve to speak. So, but then equally, if what you've been doing is causing a lot of harm, so there are certain individuals I would never invite to a space because they're notoriously transphobic. So the way that they are causing harm is unacceptable to me. So I would not invite them into a space with people who I'm saying, okay, and I don't believe in safe spaces. That's a myth, and we need to stop saying it. I believe in safer spaces because I cannot guarantee how any of you will behave in the space. I can guarantee what my response will be, but you being in the space and you doing what you did in the space has already happened, and that could have caused harm. That's why I don't believe in safe spaces, but I can provide a safer space by looking at, okay, this person, I can see that they've been causing harm. So they may be Black, they may be doing a specific area of activism. However, they are causing harm, and I can see that they're causing harm. So I do not invite them to the space. But then equally, when I see that maybe 10 years ago, somebody got it wrong, and I can see the length and breadth of the work that they've done, it depends on who they cause harm to, because I have to go then consult with the people they've caused harm to, whether it would be okay to bring this person into the space. So a lot of the time I like to look at what we do agree on and whether there's room to bring all of these different people within the space to actually hold space and have those conversations or do those performances or whatever else. Opinions are not facts. So then there's that as well. So people like to confuse opinions with facts, and there is kind of a lot of chatter about, providing space for people who may not necessarily have been afforded space before. That's in some way neglecting spaces for other types of people. I don't get involved in that kind of nonsense. If you don't like the space that I provided, that is centering people that are usually either pushed to the margins or abused in certain types of ways, if you don't like that I'm centering those groups, this may not be the space for you. And that is okay. I had to learn that over the earlier years of my career, is I was trying to please everyone. I was like, well, everyone's Black and I need to make sure all skin folk ain't kinfolk. You don't need to invite all of these people to the table. Sometimes they don't get a meal, and that's fine. Don't bring them to the table. Don't serve them any food. They can provide their own tables. This space here is about centering people that we need to protect. So protect trans Black women, period. If you don't believe in that, then perhaps this is not the table for you. And that's okay.
I love that. I love the passion. I love the fire. And I want to unpack the word centered again for our listeners here at ReImagine Liberty, because it's important. Centering is the conscious decision to make sure the focus of the dialogue, focus of the space is actually rooted in the topic you are choosing to explore. So to center a person of trans experience, to center Blackness, to center womanhood, you wouldn't have a panel of white men with one Black woman speaking. That would be the visual that demonstrates you have not centered your topic properly. When we talk about centering Black life mattering, you should have a spectrum of Black life, or you have only centered a type of Black person to be protected in this work. So centering is the conscious decision to make sure that the focus of your topic is adequately displayed in all of the textures that it appears in the world. That is centering. The opposite of centering is bias, which we have plenty of when we are creating content. It is the choice not to center your topic fully. It is the choice through your own implicit bias and prejudice to center the type of Black that you want to see on the screen. And in that decision, you are causing harm because you are taking voice and visibility away from the full range of folks that you are stating you are here to protect. So I'm loving that. I'm loving that. And I want to make sure that everyone is keeping up with the words because words are important in 2021. I'm going to pivot back to you, Toni, right? We got to say what we mean in these streets here because they are very honest. And because of social media, you are creating a resume, a verbal resume of what you're about. So I want to make sure everybody's following along. So Toni, I want to pivot back to you a bit. When we talk about creating space for women of trans experience, what are some of the things that our cisgendered sisters fail at regularly? What are some small common bites that we can kind of check ourselves on moving forward in this work that we are all here to do?
You know, I definitely am a believer of people having to check their privilege. And I did a conversation not too long ago about Alice Walker's womanism. And I feel like there's a thing when it comes to Black women, period, of sisterhood. I feel like, you know, we all know where it comes from, but I feel like there's not enough sisterhood. There's not enough love. There's not enough intimacy between sisters. And I think especially when you get into the specifics of Black women who are cis and then Black women who are trans, because then it becomes a conversation, well, y'all don't belong over here because y'all weren't born this way or with these parts and et cetera, et cetera. And so one, there's a lack of education and understanding the difference between sex and gender identity. Two, I think there's also this thing where when you talk about language mattering, language definitely matters. And when we talk about allies, just because you don't disagree with something does not mean you're an ally. This just means you don't disagree. So what work are you doing when you're at home with your family and they see a trans person across the TV? Are you hearing language and then having conversation about language that's being used? Or when you're with your boyfriend and he sees one of us and he calls us, oh, that's a man, are you correcting him and say, no, that's one of my sisters? Like, when you feel the need to tell people, because, and sometimes they think it's a compliment when you need to tell me, oh, you know, she was born. No, that's not cute. And for me, it all boils down to there not being that level of protection for women, period. And when we talk about protect Black women, which is very true. But I also think about, are we as Black women protecting each other as well, especially when it comes to this particular conversation of sisterhood and womanhood and Black women who are trans, Black women who are cis. How are we connecting with one another? And there's not enough of that. I just feel like there's a lot of divisive. Y'all are here and we are here. And when I went going back to what I mentioned earlier about, you know, because I am very intentional about when I identify myself, I'm a Black woman of trans experience. Because the first things you hear, and when you meet me at my gender and my race, Black and woman. You can meet me at trans later. We'll talk about that later. But when you meet me, you're going to see a Black woman. And that's what I want people to understand about that too. We have so much more similarities than we do differences. Mm-hmm. And we don't need to talk about that from a assigned at birth type of conversation. These are womanhood experiences that we have more similarities than differences. So I would say, yeah, those are a lot of things that's being failed. And especially, you know, women that are parents, because that's a whole nother conversation, my God. But but yeah, I would say those are a few things that I've even experienced that. And I'll just do this little quick story. Like one day I got my PrEP shot, which if anybody doesn't know what PrEP means, that it is HIV prevention. So I went and got my PrEP shot, and I was telling them, oh, you know, everything is legally changed. My gender marker, my gender marker on my birth certificate, driver's license, everything is representing F, female. Perfect. So I asked, I said, so do that, does that need to be changed like on my medical? Or when you do my blood test and it comes back and it says my patient number, then it says sex and it says M. And she said to me, she's like, well, no, I don't think it needs to be changed because men were born with certain body parts and women were born with certain body parts. So I don't think just because you transition things will change. What? First of all, you just called me a man, whether you know it or not, sis. You just called me a man, whether you know it or not, because you just said men have certain parts and women have parts, and the parts that we're discussing are the parts that I have, which you are saying a man has, and not somebody assigned male at birth has. There's a difference. I can't deny what I was assigned at birth, but what you won't do is tell me how I identify when I've already told you what I am. Nor do I present as such. So that is a perfect example of literally just experiencing this within the last month of going to the doctor or whatever. So I'm just like, we got to do better. We have to do better. And you being in a medical field where you work with the community specifically, because PrEP is heavily centered around Black MSM and Black trans folk, period. You need to do better and you need to educate yourself. And a person like me, you can't do that to a person like me because, baby, I'm calling people that can get you the education that you need, because that's not okay. And you won't trigger me while I'm trying to get my PrEP shot.
It's very true. It's very true. When we talk about this work, for those that are tuning in here at ReImagine Liberty, I want you all to really ask yourself a question. If Black life matters, period, then where are you getting stuck? Mm-hmm. For anyone, when Black life matters, period, we shouldn't have these buts that we have to meander and ruminate on. Yeah, it matters, but. It matters, but. And the things you are most uncomfortable with is the work that you're being called to do. The minute it hits, don't run from it, because there's an honest moment where I am so cool with Black Life Mattering until I have to do something about the parts of me that prevent that from happening. So getting back to a couple of powerful things that you just said, Toni, for our sisters that want to be about this work fully and inclusively, check yourself when you start telling people's prior business about anything, regardless of the experience that you arrived here today. We have all grown. I come from the generation that didn't have to grow up in front of everybody. I didn't have social media growing up on the first part of my development. So I don't have a public record of all of my poor decisions. Thank God. Thank God, right? So for those of us that don't have that benefit, that don't have an entire part of their lives that simply wasn't recorded, and you all are literally growing up in front of all of us on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, check yourself when you want to start referring to things that people have been through before you met them. You weren't there, period. And that's not a trans conversation. That's a person conversation. All of us as women have things that we would prefer not be brought up because we didn't know any better. And if you didn't, keep living. Okay. So the second piece that I thought you said was powerful is, if we are in the service of people, specifically medical, Black women in general in the medical field are at risk and are regularly harmed in a way that is flat the hell out unacceptable. It is. We are twice as likely to lose a newborn baby at birth if it happens to be serviced by folks that are not Black. Twice as likely for my newborn baby to die because the person caring for my baby does not look like me. That is a level of prejudice that is murderous, that is killing folk, that we can document and measure before we get into anybody's experience when it comes to cis or trans, just period, as a Black woman walking into a doctor's office. So I love the fact that you pointed that out, Toni. I'll pivot to you, Kayza. When it comes to your work through Black Lives Matter, what are some of the loudest areas that we need to do better as a people, just in general?
Trans lives. A lot of the time, for instance, people will show up to marches because that seems to be like the place where people like to show themselves. They show up to a march and then they go home and they're like, I was at the march, here's the pictures. It's like, so what are you doing outside of that? And a lot of the time, they hold very like transphobic views. They hold very homophobic views. They hold, people hold very misogynistic views. And it's like, I like what you said earlier about Black Lives Matter, period. If you are in the Black experience, then that's where you need to spread all of your love and all of your attention. And if you're not doing that, which a lot of people are not doing because they are policing the Black experience, they're saying, well, if you're a Black cis man, then, you know, we're the ones being killed, and so we need to be platformed. We shouldn't care about all these other things. You know, there's an agenda against the Black man, you're against the Black family. We keep hearing that a lot. You know, why are we not mentioned on certain websites? Why are you not talking about us? And it's like, well, Black people, including trans women, including others with the trans experience, are showing up to those marches, are putting themselves on the line for all of us. That's where we need to start our work, is saying all people with the Black experience matter, period. So people also need to think about, when they say they want to be about Black Lives Matter, they need to go and look about what that actually means. Now, if what your work is about a specific area that you've chosen to occupy, that's okay. But just don't call it Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter is very specific to all of the Black experience. If your work is outside of that, it is not Black Lives Matter, period. And I want people to really sit down and digest that. You know, not everybody is involved in, you know, Black Lives Matter Global Network. You're involved in the Black Lives Matter Global Movement, which is fantastic. There is a difference. And when you stand up and you say Black Lives Matter, if it's not all Black Lives Mattering, then rethink about the purpose of your work. Rethink about, you may need to read a few more books, you may need to be in a few more seminars, you may need to be very honest with yourself about why you're doing this work, because there is a lot of career activism going on, and people like to show up at marches and be on the news and do all these things, but they are only speaking about a very specific type of Blackness. That's not Black Lives Matter, people. We need to do better.
And can I add something to that really quick? I feel like activists have to stop using the excuse of, oh, we didn't know because the media doesn't say anything. What? We have to stop using that excuse, because for me, if justice for Black lives incorporates all of us, I don't need the media to tell me what's going on in my community. I know what's going on. Period. That's all.
I love that. For those of you all tuning in, this is the ReImagine Liberty podcast. We are sitting here with Ms. Toni Bryce and Ms. Kayza Rose, discussing what it truly means to be inclusive and provide equity for Black life everywhere. And I'd like to spend some time with how to get in contact with you both, starting with you, Toni. Toni Bryce is hailing from Atlanta, Georgia, by way of the United States. How can folks find you, Toni?
Well, all social media is the Toni Bryce. All social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And my personal email is thetonybryce@gmail.com.
Love that. And same question to you, Kayza, hailing to us from London, England, by way of UK. How can folks get in contact with you and support your efforts there?
Okay, so you can find me at Kayza Rose on Twitter. That is not locked, so you can DM me there, you can speak to me there. It's the same on Instagram, but I'm very selective about who I allow into my space on Instagram. So you can find me. It doesn't mean I'm going to add you. You know, I need to feel safe enough to add you into that space. Whereas on Twitter, you can come find me, you can DM me, and you know, yeah, there's a lot of things that are about safety. And we have to respect where each other is coming from when it comes to safety. So yeah, you can find me in those ways.
I love it. Thank you all for spending time with us today at ReImagine Liberty. I am the host, Kayza Lee, bringing folks together from across our global network at Blvck Womxn Worldwide so we can have these very important discussions. I will end with this thought as we conclude, that I want you both to be safe. I would love for you both to connect, since you are in similar paths outside of this conversation. And I can't thank you all enough for collecting us and educating us on what it looks like to be fully loving to Black life. My goal at the end of 2021 is for our anthem, That Black Women Matter to Me, to be a natural global experience for anyone tuning in. So I would ask you all that one favor in your areas, in your spheres of influence, if we can start championing that Black women really matter to me, personally to me for the rest of 2021, that would be a world of difference. Again, my name is Kayza Lee. Thank you so much for spending time with ReImagine Liberty, the podcast, and my two gorgeous co-hosts today, Toni, Bryce, and Miss Kayza Rose. We will see you all soon, and thank you so, so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank